Morning. Hope you've had a good week. One of my highlights for this week was 24 hours away with leaders of other large churches and leaders of streams of churches in the UK. Contrary to what Matt has said, there are other churches out there, and we think it's rather important to get together from time to time because we think that real unity is based around relationships rather than anything else. And this was 24 hours hosted by Nikki and Pippa Gumbel, who, of course, have been central to the Alpha course, which we've just been talking about for so long. One of the things that they said whilst we were together was now 22.5 million people have done the Alpha course around the world. Something which that many people have done is worth trying. So if you've not yet been on it and you're exploring questions of faith at the moment, we would really recommend it. Okay, we're in the third week of a series on an Old Testament book, the book of Nehemiah. Let me give you very briefly big background and then little background. Big background, we're in the 5th century BC. We're at the height of the Persian Empire. The Jews are scattered right across the empire. Introduce at this point in time the main character, unsurprisingly, given the name of the book, Nehemiah. Nehemiah is in the court of the king, and he hears that the walls of Jerusalem are down. And this is the story of Nehemiah's travel back from the winter capital, Susa, right across to Jerusalem, and the work he then begins to do. If we stand any chance of understanding this, we must be aware that it is not simply, for Nehemiah, the motivation of national humiliation. Obviously, anyone's capital, when it's been razed to the ground, feels bad, wants to do something about it. But there's a much bigger motivation which is fueling Nehemiah's journey and his work. And it is that right through the Old Testament scriptures, there's an understanding that when Jerusalem is strong, and when it is prepared for God to visit it, then not only is Jerusalem blessed, but good things happen all over the world. And the psalmist writes about Jerusalem being the joy of the whole earth, not the joy of the Jews, not the joy of those who live in Jerusalem, but the joy of everybody. And one of the things we talked about last week was how everyone needs, and societies to be strong and healthy, need strong communities of faith amongst them. And that is not just something that's recognized by historians and sociologists, but it's something we find deeply rooted in Scripture. So Nehemiah's back because he thinks that if they can rebuild Jerusalem, then God may do things which means it becomes the talking point for everyone. And every nation is pleased that God dwells in Jerusalem and good things ripple out from there. That's the big background. Little background, we've done 2 chapters so far. The first chapter, Nehemiah mourns when he hears the news of the state of Jerusalem. Chapter 2, he travels back to Jerusalem and he does a night recce. He goes all around the city, not telling anyone what's in his heart. He wants to build it. He's spoken to the king. King says, I'll give you lots of resources. He goes around the city, but it says he's not said anything to anyone. Then, 2/3 of the way through the chapter, he gathers everyone together. He tells them the story so far, and then he says these words, let us rebuild. And it seems that just that sentence galvanizes people into action. And that's where we've got to, and we're going to read chapter 3 this morning, or at least some of it. I've chosen verses throughout the chapter in order to give you a feel for the whole. You're probably better following it on the screen behind me. You'll be challenged, I think, if you try and follow it in your Bible, but do read it all afterwards if you would like to. So here's a number of verses from Nehemiah chapter 3, which will give you a feel for what happens after Nehemiah has made this call. Come on. Nehemiah 3, verse 1. Eliashib, the high priest, and his fellow priests went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set its doors in place, building as far as the Tower of the 100, which they dedicated, and as far as the Tower of Hananel. And the men of Jericho built the adjoining section, and Zakur, son of Imri, built next to them. Verse 5, the next section was repaired by the men of Tekoa, but the nobles wouldn't put their shoulders to the work under their supervisors. Uzziel, son of Hahahiah, You know, this is one of these passages which it's easier to read to yourself than reading out loud. One of the goldsmiths repaired the next section, and Hananiah, one of the perfume makers, made repairs next to that. They restored Jerusalem as far as the broad wall. Rephaiah, son of Hur, ruler of a half-district of Jerusalem, repaired the next section, and Shallum, son of Halohesh, ruler of the half-district of Jerusalem, repaired the next section with the help of his daughters. The Dung gate was repaired by Malchijah, son of Rechah, ruler of the district of Beth Hakkarim. He rebuilt it, and he put its doors and bolts and bars in place. Next to him, Barak, son of Zabbai, zealously repaired another section, from the angle to the entrance of the house of Eliashib, the high priest. And above the horse gate, the priest made repairs, each in front of his own house. Next to them, Zadok, son of Immer, made repairs opposite the house. Next to him, Shemaiah, son of Shechaniah, the guard at the east gate, made repairs. Now, this is quite a team, if you like, that Nehemiah gets together. Let's just have a look at it. Firstly, he's got faith leaders involved. First one talks about the high priest and the fellow priests. Then there are politicians and civic leaders. Several times we're told that people rule half a district of Jerusalem. There are others who've come to the city from beyond its borders. We're told about the men of Jericho and those from Tekoa. There are the makers of luxury goods, perfume makers, the Chanel of the time. Business people. We're told about goldsmiths, people who are making money from their skills. We read of families, not only Shallum, but with his daughters as well, and no doubt many others who are not mentioned by name. A wide variety of skills. Here's my question. What were these guys doing prior to Nehemiah making this call? And it seems they were simply getting on with life. They sound to me like a pretty capable bunch. They sound to me like this, having the sort of diversity and skills that you'd really want to be able to pull together and do something with. Why were they not doing anything before now? Now, the text doesn't tell us straight, but here's the suggestion. Here's the suggestion as to why they were not doing very much. They were just getting on with life. I wonder whether they'd been involved in the previous project that Ezra had led. 14 years before, Ezra had built the temple. I wonder whether they'd gathered under his leadership, built the temple, and have thought, our job is done. They'd somehow at least got used to the disgrace of the walls being down and just lived their lives amongst it all. What did Nehemiah do? Nehemiah helped people see that there was a fresh challenge for their generation. Nehemiah, sort of just by his words, helped people see that though the temple had been built, there was still more to do. And here's what I want to suggest. Here's the application that I want to suggest for us today. You and I cannot rest on what our spiritual fathers and mothers have already done. Because in every generation there is a fresh challenge. In every group of men and women, they have to ask, what are we meant to be doing to contribute both to the building of the church and the blessing of the world beyond the borders of the church? And if we do not understand that, then we will always, and the church has historically regularly got itself in trouble because it's used the same tools that its father used and tried to do the same project and found that because times have changed, it hasn't been effective in the way that it was. Let me give you an example of this, or an illustration rather. Many years ago now, in fact, one of Philippa, my wife, and my first holidays was a walking and camping holiday in the Lake District. Now, I look back and marvel that we even did it. I hate camping and my wife hates walking. So why we did that as a holiday, I suspect that it was only the bank balance that forced us in that sort of direction. And we went to the lakes entirely ill-equipped for any sort of walking. We had one shower-proof top between us. No compass, no maps, no Kendall mint cake, if you've ever been to the lakes. Nothing at all, no walking boots. And consequently, we decided that we would try and stay as sort of close to the ground, not up in the hills as we could. One day we decided to go for a walk. The guidebook, which we did have, told us it was a 10-mile round walk. We could park the car and walk back to the car. And the guidebook called it a easy walk. So we thought that's our sort of thing, or at least Philip said that's my sort of thing. So off we went. We enjoyed 7 miles of the walk, and we'd gone down one side of one of the lakes, and we'd come round into a parallel valley. And as we pushed on to about the 7-mile, we suddenly realized that the path, which had stayed very flat until then, suddenly went up into the hills. Not only did it go up into the hills, but we could see the clouds and the rain coming down. So our choice was before us. We either turned round and walked another 7 miles all the way back, or we headed on. So we decided to keep going. We went up into the clouds, and of course, in no time at all, we were both soaked to the skin. Not only were we soaked to the skin, but the cloud came down with such an intensity that we actually started holding hands in order not to lose each other. It was at that sort of point where you suddenly realize how naive and stupid you have been. Nobody goes walking without the right equipment. The elements of nature can be very dangerous, of course. Now, fortunately, we managed to make it over the hill, back down, found the car. But as we sat there soaking wet, having sort of got back to safety, we reflected on the fact that as we went on the journey changed, and we were ill-equipped for the task. And I want to suggest that's a picture of what happens so often in each generation for the church. It sets out on a journey, but as the culture and the context around it changes, it often finds itself ill-equipped for the task. And consequently, it gets itself into trouble. And I want to appeal to us as a church at this point in time to make sure that we're well equipped for the challenges that we face. For any of us who have been around for a while know that our society has changed hugely in the last 30 years. That there's been massive crosswinds at work, that probably change has never happened more quickly than it's happening right now. Let me just suggest 3 ways in which society is changing. There would be many more, but let me just suggest 3. The first is that the way that people think is changing. The philosophers amongst us will tell us it's a change from modernism to postmodernism. And there's lots of different facets of this, and don't worry, I'm not going to give you a philosophy class right now. But let's just look at one perspective very briefly. Modern, or I should say postmodern thinking, suggests there's no one perspective that holds all the truth of any one event or idea, and that everyone's view is as valuable as the next. So whilst a previous generation might have applauded when someone stood up with confidence and said, I know my faith, I know Christianity is true, and that everybody else is wrong, the postmodern will almost certainly find a view expressed in that way difficult to digest. They may say something like this: I understand it may be true for you, but how can you say it's wrong for others? How do you know? What business of yours is it to make such an arrogant judgment? Truth, it seems, is now personal. It can be right for me without making your different beliefs wrong, and it's often discovered through personal experience. So here's the challenge for us. The challenge for us is to learn to express our confidence, which we should rightly have in what God has done for us, whilst also showing sensitivity to others' concerns in such a way that they will actually give you a hearing, in such a way that they will actually consider your confidence rather than switch off from it. The way people think has changed. The way that we live and the people we live alongside has changed. We now live in a multi-ethnic, multi-viewed, pluralistic society. People with other worldviews and other faiths do not simply live somewhere else in the world, rather they now live next door. They don't work somewhere else in the world, they work in your or my company or next door in the next door desk. And of course, for many of them, they also prove as we get to know them that they are thoughtful, friendly and caring people. In previous times and previous generations, many, and on occasions one has to say including the church, have found it easy to demonize people who live at a distance. But of course it's a lot harder to do that when they become our friends. And we realize again that the weather has changed. That we are no longer the voice, but actually one amongst many. And to simply try and shout louder and turn up the volume comes across as shrill and not easy on the ear. And so we have to rather learn to combine a new degree of both humility and love as we seek to draw others to the one that we love. Change of technology, change of thinking, change of the people that live next door to me or that I'm involved with, changes in the technology that we use. The birth of the internet and other forms of technology. I don't know how many of you even remember the birth of the internet. Or for how many of you it's just like, it's always existed, hasn't it? As long as Matt Ellis has been alive, and even longer, the internet has existed. Previously, here's the change. Here's the implication of the change. Previously, the church was used to having its private discussions about what it believed and how it conducts its mission. Now, the truth was, if those outside the church had heard these discussions, they would have sometimes been shocked at the tone in which they were had. Now, it's quite possible that they may have felt that they were being treated as targets, not as people, and that conquest, rather than love, seemed to be the motivation. I was reminded of this week when I saw a post on the internet from a church who was encouraging its members to go to another town this week for a project that they called Boots on the Ground. Now, I have no doubt that these are sincere people who intend to do good things. But I think that sort of language posted in public can be misunderstanding, especially when this is the very phrase that has been used in conjunction with possible military action in Syria. Is this the best language to use when it could be confused with a highly controversial military action that could be conceived as anti-people of another faith? Now, I want to suggest that this challenge is not just for churches, but it's for you and me as individuals too. Whenever you blog or tweet or use social media, remember all your friends are listening. Private conversations are a thing of the past. Consequently, you and I have to find ways of expressing our faith that enable us to remain true to who you are and what we believe, whilst not ostracizing others at the same time. Now, if you don't know me, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not going flaky here. I believe Jesus is the only way to the Father. I'm totally persuaded that Christians should be proactive in terms of mission. In fact, I think some of these changes of weather will provide us with huge new opportunities. But I suggest that this is one of the challenges for this generation. Orthodox, fervent, and expressing our faith in a way that others can engage with and understand at the same time. I want to suggest French philosopher Blaise Pascal's charge remains as important as ever. Well, he said this 300-400 years ago. Make Christianity attractive, make good men wish it were true, and then show how it is. That is the charge on us at the start of the 21st century. And I think there's an invitation from the Holy Spirit for us to conceive of new ways of doing our faith and building the church that will enable it to be a huge blessing to this city and this nation as a result. Nehemiah galvanized men and women to action because he said there's something to be done in this generation. I want to suggest it's the same for us now. It's the first thing that he did. The second thing that he did, there are many other, I'm going to draw out two other important dynamics from this chapter. Second one he said was, although there's been a change of weather, the temple is still important. Verse 1, Eliashib, the high priest, and his fellow priests went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. What's that got to do with it? The sheep gate is where they brought the sacrifices into the city to the temple so that worship could continue. And we must not forget, in whatever else we do, that gathering together. The temple was a place where everyone could gather one day a week to worship. I want to encourage you, Christ Church, do not forget the importance of gathering together. Every man and woman is a worshipper. And all of us, if we do not worship God, will worship something else instead. Now, if you live in this city, you don't need me to tell you that there are thousands of things competing for your heart. And any of them and anything that gets our heart gets our worship as a result. And that is why you and I need to gather together every week. Because it's like our hearts need resetting from all the noise, all the appeals, all the other promises of something beautiful, something attractive, something that will make all the difference. That bombards us every day. And so we have to gather. To gather one day in 7 is a rhythm God has built deep into life. There's lots of rhythms like that. One of them, very simple one, is breathing. You breathe in and you breathe out. And if you don't, and if you decide to stop doing either of those, it won't be very long, of course, before you're in trouble. We've all seen the 100-meter sprinters, the way they, head for the ribbon. And of course, as they do so, they're not breathing in enough. And we've all seen them fall over the line and literally fall on the floor, deeply gasping for air, because they've ignored one of the fundamental rhythms of life. Now, because they've only ignored it for 10 seconds, they've got away with it. But if we ignore another of the fundamental rhythms of life, gathering together and then going out, gathering together, then it can equally get us into trouble in terms of our spiritual lives. Sunday is a day to breathe in. It's to worship and to listen to preaching and allow my mind to be reformed and my heart to be recentered. Now, here's my observation. My observation is that the strongest Christians are those who've learned to make church going instinctive. Those that walk with God most closely are those who don't think, shall I go today? It's gone deeper than that. They understand this is like breathing. You just do it. And if you have to miss a week, you make sure you don't miss the next one. Not because anyone's not going to be happy, but just I need it. And I want to suggest we need to be together. And I appreciate all the challenges. But I want to encourage you, for your sake and for our sake. If as individuals we need to gather to worship, to recenter our hearts, do you not think this city needs lots of gatherings of men and women putting God in his right place? Isn't that a blessing alone to the city? To find there's oases all over where they can come. He's great. That advert now pales into insignificance. He's great. That relationship is never going to do what it promises. He's great. That career needs to be taken steadily. It doesn't hold what it promises. He does. So the first thing we're told is that Eliashib the priest and the other priests, they get the sheep gate built so they can get the temple really working. And so we gather on a Sunday and then we scatter during the week. And Nehemiah and most of the chapter, we've not got too long for this now, but for most of the rest of the chapter, Nehemiah is putting the men and women, he's saying, out, build the walls so that the other 6 days of the week can work effectively, so that you have somewhere to live for the other 6 days of the week. Now, it's interesting that it's not just individuals who build these different parts of the wall. We see, as we've seen, it's not just Elisha, but it's his priests with him. Then it's the men of Jericho. Then it's the sons of Hassanah. It's the men of Tekoa. It's Zakur, was it, or somebody and his daughters. It's teams of people. Now, here's what we've learned over the last year or so. That as we encourage different teams, whether you help build the temple on a Sunday or whether you're helping build the walls during the week, that the people who do it best are the people who do what they're most passionate about. And our encouragement for everybody here is, wherever possible, find an area to build the walls, to build the temple where you are passionate. I was chatting with several friends of mine recently who lead different connect groups. They said this. They said, we've been in the church for most of the last 9 years, and we've often served, and we've served in different areas, and we've been happy to do that. But since we've started leading something we're really passionate about, it's been different. Instead of having to add something to our lives, this has just been like breathing. This has been natural. It's been deeply fulfilling. And guess what? When you do something that's natural and fulfilling, do you think you do it better or worse than you do other things? You do it better. So we want to encourage you, wherever possible, do things that you're passionate about. Here's what the American author Henry Thoreau wrote. Most men, he said, lead lives of quiet desperation and go to the grave with the song still in them. Now, we want Christ Church to be a place where many, many men and women learn to sing their song. And as you learn to sing it, we want you to stand on our shoulders so that others can sing it as well. What is the song that God has put in your heart? Maybe it's something to do in your industry or your hall of residence. Maybe it's your street or your friendship group. What is the song? Christians should be wonderful song singers, filling the city with music. Now, some of you, maybe a few of you, maybe more than a few, will be sitting here saying, David, you've talked about this before. You've talked about this passion thing. It's not as easy as it sounds to work it out. How do I work out what my thing is? Well, it's interesting. Let's just look a bit at what Nehemiah does with different groups. This may help us. For sometimes Nehemiah seems to say your contribution is right in front of your nose. In other words, for some of those who build the wall, it's right outside their house. Let me illustrate what I mean. I was recently speaking to someone at Christ Church who is in a job that demands very long hours. She was telling me that she loved helping others find faith, but that right now she had no more time, and that her life was already in relational overload. There was no way that she could add anything else to her life. Then it had dawned on her. She did not need to make new friends. Her working life was full of people she liked, connected with, and who were eager to have faith conversations if only she gave them the time for them to happen naturally. What was required was not more time or new friends, but that she changed her focus and realized that her part of the wall was right opposite her home. And I want to suggest that's the case for lots of us. I'm not appealing here, as we look to build the temple and build the walls, for a bit of extra voluntary time in your week. I'm actually suggesting something much more radical than that. I'm suggesting you recenter your whole life around God's mission, that you do what you're doing now, but do it and work out how you can help people find faith or help people go on the journey you're on at the moment and make your world a better place at the same time. So for some, the contributions may be right in front of us. For others, this may be a time where there's simply too much else happening in our lives right now to work it out. The job for us is simply to serve. Maybe this was Malchijah in verse 14. Did you notice him as we read these verses? It says that the dung gate was repaired by Malchijah. Now, I wonder what the dung gate was. The dung gate was the gate through which all the excrement from the city was taken out. It was not clearly the sort of place you wanted to hang around, but it was also clearly an important place for the city. Now, the chances are that whilst the gate hadn't been built, that area had been used for the removal of dung over the intervening period. In other words, it was a pretty unpleasant place to build a gate. I will leave the rest to your imagination. You can imagine. But Malchijah said, I will do it. And you know, sometimes there's just too much going on. Or for whatever reason, I was chatting with someone the other day. He said, what I'll do is whatever I am able. I'm just here. I'll do whatever I'm able. We'll let others work out that passion thing right now. I'll do whatever I'm able. I think that was Malchijah. I'll do the dung gate. Sometimes it's even appropriate to serve out of position. Did you notice here the perfume maker built some of the wall? Now, I have to confirm, I don't think I've ever met a perfume maker. But I imagine that they have very delicate skin. I imagine they have a very refined sense of smell and use of their senses. And that they're used to working in glamorous surroundings with very expensive materials. So you can imagine the perfume maker pitching up to Nehemiah and saying, hi, I make perfume. I would love to help, but I can't imagine there's anything I can do. And Nehemiah looked up and down, two arms, 2 legs, you can build the wall. And this person suddenly finds themselves, getting their hands dirty, using their bodies so they ache at the end of the day. And they're thinking, this is not what I am about at all. I'm way out of position. Now, have you ever felt like that in the church? Because there are times and there are conditions where we seem to be allowed to play way out of position. 2 things happen when you and I are playing out of position. Firstly, we add skills to our life that we didn't have before, which round us out. And secondly, we add character to our life that we didn't have before. And because God thinks that both skills and character matter, he allows us to play out of position sometimes. And it may be for some of us that right now we're like Hananiah. We'd really like to be making perfume. But actually, we're required to build some walls. So we do it with everything we've got. And finally, and maybe the band could come back, please. We notice that some at least worked zealously. Barak, son of Zabbai, zealously repaired another section. I had a look at how the dictionary defines zeal. It said with great energy or enthusiasm. Do you know where that word enthusiasm comes from? The word enthusiasm is made up of 2 Greek words, en, meaning in, and theos, meaning God. In other words, it's literally God in you. To be enthusiastic is to be filled with God. Which brings us back nicely, as we come into land, to the reason for it all. Him. We do this not because we're bothered about building a great church or, in the end, doing anything else other than we want to please him because he's loved us and because he's forgiven us and because he's given us life. So I want to suggest, Paul writes it this way to the Corinthians when he's asking for money. I've not been asking for money today. I've been encouraging you to give yourselves. But he said, give yourself first to God and then give yourself to us. And that's a great model. And I want to encourage all of us. Do not worry firstly about where you should work, but give yourself to God, that you may be enthused. Because when you are enthused, then you find your passion, you find your area of service. You start to realize the weather's changed, but the Spirit is going to lead us all and show us how to rebuild the walls in this generation with all the new challenges that come with that. And so we see how Nehemiah's leadership galvanizes us too. And says, we're here. We're ready to build. May God give us wisdom in this new weather system that we find ourselves in. May God equip us to serve with passion. May we gather on a Sunday, and may we scatter during the week, whether we're in position, out of position, simply serving, but it's all for him. We give ourselves to him. We become entheost. We get filled with God. Let's stand together, shall we?